Many of our online participants were wondering, Maggie, if you could clarify your statement that this argument, this argument is fundamentally about the connection between sex and making babies. David from Houston, for instance, said for Maggie's argument to be true, 100% of marriages would have to involve procreation. And I wanted you to respond to that, and I was also wondering, John, if you agree with David's statement.
Yeah, this is part of, I think, sort of an impoverishment that takes place, in my view, and excuse me, but obviously many very smart people have that same objection. So, but there is an impoverishment to thinking that, I mean, first of all, let me give you the like kind of brief polished answer, which I say over and over again, which is every union of male and female serves the purpose of procreation, to the extent that if you're faithful to your promises, you will not be creating children across multiple households. So even if you never have children, your marriage is serving this public purpose. And any children that you do produce will in fact be joined. You know, they'll start life with a mom and dad committed to their care, and this is the part of the heart of what makes something marital unions. But I think so. The great infertility argument says, well, because there are some people included in the marriage population who cannot or will not have children, adding gay guys into it, or women, would be just the same. It's not going to have any consequences. It's the same thing. But first of all, I think that it's, you know, it's an impoverished, I mean, we have always had, even when the connections between sex and babies were tighter and more obvious and more difficult to escape, there have always been people who are married who cannot have children, and there have always been people who are not married who did have children. People were always aware of these facts, and yet they were repeatedly able to see and say that a sexual union of male and female, where you're pre-committed to raising your children in the same home, is that marriage is oriented towards procreation in some way, even though these things are true. And in the life cycle of the natural life cycle of the marriage, there are older people without children. There are young couples without children. Their presence in the marriage pool doesn't send a message. It doesn't change anything about marriage. I would say that these truths were so big and obvious. I mean, technology has changed our capacity to fool ourselves about the relationship between sex and procreation, but it also takes an enormous amount of cultural work. I like to say for years before I dealt with gay marriage, and I'll be quiet, I know we need to let someone else talk, but for years before gay marriage was an issue, I was actually, when I say this, I'm thinking of a conference at the Institute for American Values back in the old days, in which, you know, a really smart guy who I really respect with his PhD would get up and say, oh, we have separated sex from reproduction. And I would think around, and I'd think about all the women I know who got pregnant, including me, and all the abortions, and all the unmarried. I mean, the fact that it's demonstrably not true does not prevent people from being pre-committed to this ideological position for. So anyway, that's my case. A union of a husband and a wife is intrinsically different, and is oriented and speaks of and redolent of this phenomenon in a way that a same-sex union doesn't and can't.
I'll try to be quick in response to the question.
Thank you.
I recognize the biology of this and how sex makes babies. And I also would agree with Maggie that responsible procreation, and you need to flesh out what that means, but responsible procreation is an important part of what marriage does. I think what the infertile couples example shows, and I think this is what Maggie fails to recognize in the book, is that there are other important goals in marriage, and that a relationship can be marriage even when the possibility of children is not on the table.